Good afternoon, everyone. At least afternoon here in Finland. I think we have 1 month of summer, and then the autumn sets in. Well, as you know, I've been trying to prepare these Discipleship in the New Age programs for you, and now we're on program 26, volume 1, section 1, and beginning with part 6, video commentary. Now, today is the 13th of August, and 34 years ago, we founded the University of the Seven Rays. Seems a long time, and then 36 years ago, we founded the Seven Ray Institute, all in the attempt to bring the ageless wisdom closer to the students, to make it more practicable and appreciated, and especially the science of esoteric psychology, which will be the new way of approaching the psychological problem of humanity. Or should I say problems, because there are so very many. It seems that we have reached that crisis point where if we try to continue in the old way, our entry into the Aquarian Age, which astronomically will occur perforce, will not occur smoothly. And the reappearance of the Christ may be delayed. Well, the Tibetan assures us that although there may be delay, all of this promised intervention by the hierarchy and by the Christ will occur. Now, as a little segue here, the Tibetan, kind of informs us of our limitations. And he's talking about the plan and how difficult it would be for him to explain the underlying purpose of this group work, at least to explain it to us, as it would be, he says, to explain decimal fractions to a 7-year-old child, no matter how brilliant he may be. Well, certainly the implications would not be there, even if the mechanics could be mastered. There are many young people who can do things that are quite astonishing, but the significance of what they can do does not come home to them. But then he closes here. He says, but if you have the needed patience, the willingness to work impersonally, and proceed with love, if you will submerge your personalities in the group life, you will know, you will perceive, and the light will break in. Now, may I say this is, coming from someone who has done this and knows how it is done. And our task is either to follow the advice carefully with faith and trust, or to ignore it, rebel against it, choose our own way, which is not based upon experience yet. He goes on to say, the power to work will come to you. We shall, and may I say by we, he means the hierarchy, the masters who are working in this way through the new group of world servers, and some of them through specialized groups. We, he says, shall then have radiant focal points, or light bearers, and the channels for the planned distribution of force. Let's pause to say that, that's all part of the externalization of the hierarchy. If hierarchy can work through channels for planned distribution of force, they become ever more effective through their disciples upon the physical plane, ever more effective upon the physical plane through their disciples. And he goes on to say, a thing which has never yet been upon the scale which we, meaning the hierarchy, now contemplate. So may I say, the redemption of humanity is in mind, and the time has come for that redemption. So indeed, friends, we are living in times full of opportunity. Saturn, interestingly, is the planet of opportunity, he tells us, and it restrains our involvement in non-essential factors and encourages us to recognize the plan, make our pledge, even as Master Decay has, to carry out the plan, and therefore succeed spiritually where otherwise we might have failed. And may I say, we have all failed here and there, made unwise choices, and found, I remember the Tibetan saying, well, there's this disciple in Australia, I think it was, and his rays were 21213, soul 2, personality 1, mind 2. Is that possible? 21213, something like that. Unusual combination. We can find such people, I think there were two of them, with the same set of rays, and one of them made an erroneous choice. And DK looking ahead, said it will take him 3 years, uh, three, I'm sorry, 3 lifetimes, 3 incarnations to recover from the poor choice that he had made. Second-ray soul, first-ray personality, second-ray mind, first-ray astral body, third-ray etheric physical vehicle. It's also intricate in a way, but it is the new psychology. And it holds the possibility of really helping to relieve humanity of the morass of material values into which it has stepped and from which it cannot seem on its own power entirely alone to extricate itself. So the great ones, they take pity upon the human condition. They've been through it, and they know how to go through it. And they advise in the best way they can attentive human beings, because of course not all are attentive by any means. They advise attentive human beings of the ways of release from this sad and entangled condition into which the poor choices of the human race have led it. Now for program 26, we begin part 6, and let's see what the Tibetan has to say. We're a little more than halfway through section 1 of this wonderful practical book, from which we can gather so much about how to live the life of discipleship. So DK says, I do not intend to continue giving you only reiterated advice upon the treading of the path of discipleship. Well, let's say, shall we not, that DK is functioning also under the cosmic law of economy. He certainly knows it a lot better than any of us would. Sometimes he repeats himself for added emphasis, but other times he knows he has said what he has to say, and it's up to people to work on it. So repeating then, I do not intend to continue giving you only reiterated advice upon the treading of the path of discipleship. Well, may I say he's going to give us something else too. He goes on, you are adult men and women and know the way. May I say that way comprises the path and at least some cognizance of what is called the way of higher evolution. The text goes on to say the practical application of the ancient rules is your personal responsibility. Let me add that in the old days, when there was a complete devotion of the chela to the guru, and the chela would do exactly what the guru said, the guru took on responsibility for the consequences of the chela's life. But things are different now. People are more intelligent. They are more independent. And they have to grow by following the hints that come to them and, of course, making adaptation of that which the master suggests. So, as he says, we only suggest. He goes on to say, what you do is your own affair. See how he puts the responsibility upon us. The text goes on, you have reached maturity and should be ready for the next step. May I add, it's a psychological maturity. It doesn't have much to do with how old the body may be. It's about the condition of the psyche. So he says, yes, you should be ready for the next step. And going on, he says, that step will be taken when you have transmuted knowledge and theory into wisdom, practice, and expression. I seem to be remembering that moment in the arcane school studies, basically, when it said, okay, now you've learned enough theoretically. Let's really begin to apply what we know. Well, at first, of course, it's going to be a spotty affair, and sometimes we will succeed in application, and other times we will fail, even miserably, when we really should have known better. All of us, that will happen. But above all, we persist, we persist, we persist. There is no other way to achievement. And we persist in faith and hope and trust and in the light which our angel of the presence and our master bring to the causal body, to our soul consciousness. I just have to say on this anniversary of the founding of the University of the Seven Rays, how wonderful it is to have been exposed to Master DK's writings. I think if we are honest and we begin thinking about where we would be without such writings, at least this is how I feel about it, it would be in a much retarded condition compared with the present degree of advancement. Somewhere he tells us that no one can, that the Master's words carry special power, and that basically no one can read and assimilate the words of the Master without really changing their lives, elevating their lives. It's all so subtle. The light dawns. Should we say that it seeps into the consciousness? Maybe sometimes people have this eureka experience and there's a blinding flash and all of that. But generally, it's a slow seeping in of a very subtle factor: the light, the love, the will to sacrifice, the synthesis, the overall will of the monad. It all seeps in if we will be patient and attentive. DK goes on, it is only in a spirit of real detachment that the best work of a disciple is done. And may I say, we have discussed discipline, dispassion, discrimination, decentralization, and big detachment, the key quality in all of those others. Only in a spirit of real detachment that the best work of a disciple is done, and we have to, may I say, ask ourselves whether we have achieved this real detachment. The second ray types, they begin in a very attached manner. It's so common, it's so natural to them that to achieve real detachment, as the Buddha emphasized as so necessary, is not an easily won perspective. But let me say that the Tibetan has to begin, in a way, knowing that we don't know really what he's talking about. We have some words and some theories, and we've heard his words repeated many times, but we're not knowers. not in the sense that we will be during the Aquarian age. We are still Piscean believers. But he knows that with time and patience and persistence, that the subtle changes in consciousness will happen. So detachment, as it was for Alice Bailey and for a number of the other disciples, turns out to be really a really important cultivation. And behind us are those teachers who know that at length we will succeed. So repeating, it is only in a spirit of real detachment that the best work of a disciple is done. The disciple, the disciple comes to realize that because of this detachment, he is, for the remainder of his life, simply a worker. So let's say that humility is entering. Humility and detachment are going together. An adjusted sense of right proportion is appearing because of the gradual achievement of detachment. So he is simply a worker. And DK goes on to say, one of a great army of hierarchical workers with supposedly, and note the word, no personality inclinations, objectives, or wishes. Now, doesn't that kind of remind us of the old adage, ask nothing for the personal self? Supposedly, no personality, inclinations, objectives, or wishes. There's that place in Raised and Initiations where it talks about the freedom achieved at each initiation, and at the third initiation there is freedom from the ancient domination of the threefold personality. I wish I had the freedom, domination. Let's see if this takes us there. Maybe not. Freedom, maybe ancient. We'll do it. We have to be so grateful that, yeah, there it is. If I could just remember, we could all just remember, page 686, and at the third degree, transfiguration. Freedom from the ancient authority, not domination, okay, ancient authority of the threefold personality, marking a climaxing moment in the life of, in the history of all initiates. Notice this goes up to the 9th initiation, and every time there's going to be a new type of freedom. So this is a very illuminating page, sort of from the end of 686, 685, and all the way into 687. Sometimes it's important, isn't it, friends, to memorize page numbers so one can go there quickly for reinforcement. Now, here we're continuing about detachment. He has no personality implications. Well, objectives, wishes, that is freedom from the ancient authority of the threefold personality. There is for him, DK says, nothing but constant work and constant association with other people. He may be a naturally isolated person with a deep craving for solitude, but that matters not, the Tibetan says. It is the penalty, DK goes on here, it is the penalty he must pay for the opportunity to meet the need of the hour. So the penalty is paid in relation to Saturn, the god of opportunity, which oftentimes suppresses personality tendencies in favor of a different type of personality response that can meet the need of the hour. The hardest organized push of the hierarchy is now taking place, and its objective is to offset the tendency of the race to crystallize into separativeness. Well, we see it now, don't we? I may add. For separation is the line of least resistance to people and nations at this time. Let me say that under the fifth ray, the law of cleavages is expressed. And that is under the great heresy of separativeness or separateness. It surely must be overcome, and it afflicts millions, maybe even billions. So, DK goes on, hence the formation of these working groups of disciples, giving an expression of group work and group cohesion and of non-separateness or separativeness. Well, It is a different way of living. We are not monks and nuns anymore. We have been. And DK tells us that the members of his groups have spent a lifetime or two in a monastery or a convent. It depends on whether it was in the East or West, what we call those institutions which undertook a phase of training with regard to the now disciple. But now the harder task arises to take those spiritual values and live in the world, but not of it. That's one of those golden sentences. I think, is it the Christ that enunciated that? That the disciple must live in the world, but must not be of the world. So if that tendency continues, there will come a time for the one who is living in the world, yet not of the world, when, at the fourth initiation, the disciple is cast out, rejected, ejected from close participation in the affairs of the human race. Now, none of us have reached that point yet, but it lies ahead. An ejection of that which is not like the majority. And the disciple is catapulted into the fifth kingdom of nature, finally, and wholly, W-H-O-L-L-Y. Interesting, isn't it, that this is a unique time. The hierarchy has existed for millions of years, and yet now comes the hardest organized push of the hierarchy. It is, after all, the society of organized and illumined minds. So what an opportunity it is to be alive now, even as we look out and see so many abuses, and that so many millions within humanity, even billions, have not learned their lesson. And one anticipates all the pain that will go into learning that lesson. But whereas humanity has had a fifth ray personality with probably a fourth ray soul, things are changing. The fifth ray is intimately associated with the law of cleavages. There are higher expressions, of course. But when that stops being the dominating personality ray and probably the fourth ray takes over, so harmony and right human relations will begin to replace this tendency towards cleavage. It's just amazing, isn't it, friends, if you follow the news or some reliable news feed, how much separativeness there is and how much humanity justifies it. It's the most natural thing in the world to want to conquer one's neighbor, have hegemony over one's neighbor, not to assist one's neighbor, to consider one's neighbor as fundamentally different from oneself. As humanity moves towards the first initiation, that separative tendency will be reduced in its intensity. So anyway, the groups such as the ones that DK gathered around him, they are meant to, anyway, set an example of group work and of cohesion and of non-separativeness. Now, no group has succeeded yet, but at least in this particular effort, succeeded entirely. But the example is being set. And so when we interact with our group members, let's remember that our job is to overcome separation and to set an example for responsive members of humanity. DK goes on to say a very few of the disciples and intuitives of the world are standing together in a twofold activity. And I want to add that standing together, shoulder to shoulder, and not fighting amongst ourselves, is a crucial next developmental stage. So standing together, they are engaged in a twofold activity. One activity is to sense and touch with greater accuracy the steadily unfolding subjective plan. Well, the purpose may be the same from beginning to end, but the plan has to unfold according to conditions, and conditions are very rarely the same as the archetypes which are meant to inspire those conditions. So that's number one, a first activity of those who are standing together. And number two, DK says, the others, or the other, is to speak and teach with greater clarity and to choose with wise exactitude the right words. Now, let me pause to say that is one of the things at which the Tibetan is so very proficient, to choose with right exactitude or wise exactitude the right words. Sometimes he gets it just the way he wants it, and sometimes he says the words are poor, inelastic things and cannot really carry his meaning. But anyway, the second initiative of those who are standing together, disciples and intuitives, is to with steadier and ever steadier accuracy to understand the unfolding, the timing of the subjective plan. And then, of course, to teach it wisely. The presentation of the sensed realities, says the Tibetan, will then lead the thinking people of the world to arrest their present trend of thought and to cooperate more fully and freely in the enlightenment of the world. DK says, I use the word enlightenment in its occult sense. The full measure of what can be done depends, as far as the individual disciple is concerned, upon his inner power to live each day as a soul. How's this done? And he gives a little bit on how to live as a soul, free from fear, free from self-consciousness, we might say, obsessive self-reflection upon oneself, free from self-consciousness and free from those reactions which stir the astral or emotional body into organized activity based on ancient habits. And may I say, probably few of us have the notion regarding how long we carry these obstructive habits, long ago instituted and even effective today. So let me at least Um, just catching my breath here a little bit. So, based on ancient habits, okay. All right. Let's see if I can mark that out a little bit. Anyway, we must stand together and have two types of activity. Two types. And that is, that's the hard thing. First, even really, to stand together, and then to carry out the plan as we can sense it. That's one thing. And the other, to speak and teach with greater clarity. Now, let me add, we certainly have an example of how this is done. Because of the color, it's, and that's why I didn't want to get too involved. Making visual adjustments, but it's hard to keep myself from doing that. Humanity, let me say, so many millions are heading in the wrong direction. They don't know that. But those people being trained in esotericism see a much bigger picture, and they do know that methods are being chosen which will lead to no real elevation. And here's the question of success. The full measure of what can be done depends, as far as the individual disciple is concerned, upon the inner power to live each day as a soul. As a soul, free from fear, free from self-consciousness, and free from those reactions which stir the astral or emotional body into organized activity and, may I say, therefore, effectively obstructive activity based on ancient habits. Now, going on with the Tibetan. For the disciple, and for the success of his work, an astral body of stillness and of acquiescence, sensitive to impressions from the soul and from the master, and reflecting the vision with as much purity of outline as may be possible, is the goal. So, friends, that's the condition that our astral body should be in. And we certainly do know that is not the condition of the astral body for so many millions. It is thoughtlessly reactive. But I have met people with the Ray 2 astral body, maybe sometimes a Ray 5 mind. They can think in the stillness. The Ray 6 astral body tends to be more reactive. So how does it go for you? Is reactivity the mode of operation for you? Astrally considered? Or is something different? Maybe along more the Ray 2 line, the Ray 1 line can just hold it and suppress. And that must change also. Every ray of the astral body can have its limitations, but I think we are aiming to have the Ray 2 astral body responsive to the second aspect of divinity, which generically works through the soul. It's all very simple. Right here on the physical plane and within the personality, let us be the soul in expression. Going on, it should be remembered that when the disciple is fully occupied in living the life of service on all three planes, and may I say that itself can present a problem. One may be active on one plane or another, but not on all three simultaneously. But anyway, on all three planes, there is little that can be said or should be said to him, but a thought may be of aid. And just pause, to what extent are we, the disciple, presumably, fully occupied with living a life of service on all three planes? Well, this is what we're trying to achieve, but DK says a thought may be of aid to such a disciple. And then he goes on, let him seek, i.e. the disciple, let the disciple seek. So DK says, let him seek in the strenuousness of his life. And let us remember how in his last sermon the Buddha called for living the strenuous life. So repeating, let him seek in the strenuousness of his life to preserve the synthesis of the personality and the integration of all parts of his equipment. Going on with DK, often in the stress of activity in one body or another, and on one plane or another, the emphasis may be temporarily so strong in some one direction that he may lose sight for a moment of the synthetic point of view of both the plan and the group. Okay, so DK is calling for integration and not at all for overemphasis. Carl Jung dealt with this. He identified 4 functions of the psyche: intuition, feeling, sensation, and thought. Intuition at the Aries point, feeling at the Cancer point, sensation at the Libra point, and thought, thinking, at the Capricorn point. So basically, he's warning even proficient disciples, don't get caught in overemphasis, which reduces your opportunity for integration and even synthesis of all factors. Then he describes how this may work. He says, physically, he is working under great pressure. I might say, that image of Master Moria rushing into a room, taking off one hat, as it were, putting on another and rushing out gives the impression of that great pressure. I once lost the reference about pressure, but found it again in the book Heart. That was not an exact quote here, but that pressure is the law of existence. Okay. Going on with DK, emotionally, he may be learning the difficult lesson of detachment and may consequently be full of a temporary rebellion. May I say, he doesn't want to detach from what is near and dear and habitual. Yet, DK says, yet on the mental plane, he is aware of a mental clarity and of a power to think which keeps him incessantly and constructively active. Well, you begin to wonder, is this the condition of many would-be disciples? What is your condition with respect to these three factors? Well, we have to assess where we stand with respect to the integration of these three factors. DK goes on. The following three terms, therefore, express quite frequently the disciple's situation where his lower nature is concerned. Excessive fatigue, emotional rebellion, and mental lucidity. How must he deal with this problem? Well, this is such a truthful assessment. Can you relate to it? It's good that there is lucidity on the mental plane, but it's, of course, it's not enough. As long as there is astral rebellion, the forces of obstruction have a foothold. How does that rebellion show itself? Maybe carrying out the thought, I just don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Even though in the mind, one knows it is profitable spiritually to do that. And the fatigue, well, I couldn't do that if I tried. I'm just too tired. I was reading the other day of a healthy man who got the COVID, and he was near to dying, but he did recover. And he said the after effects were so debilitating, he couldn't put on his socks even if he wanted to. Physical fatigue. That is a discouraging place to be, and I can attest to that. Okay, now maybe some of the good news comes a little bit here. Uh, Physical fatigue need not necessarily impair in any way his usefulness. With many people, physical conditions impair their work, for their attention becomes focused on the undesirable physical situation. This is a very big hint. Disciples, however, often have a curious capacity to continue with their work no matter what may be happening to them physically. So that's good to know, isn't it? Going on with decay, the physical brain can be so much a reflector of the mental life that he will remain essentially unaffected by this is a part of, isn't it, taking the mind off the personal self and especially off those liabilities which would normally almost obsess the attention of the average non-aspiring individual. DK says further, the disciple learns to live with his physical liabilities under adverse conditions. Let me say that Alice Bailey certainly learned that. When you think about all the things that were physically wrong with her during the last few years, including those constant blood transfusions, but with her first ray personality and mind, she overcame that. If the physical brain can be so much the reflector of mental life that he will remain essentially unaffected by any other conditions. Powerful, powerful hint about how to keep on keeping on, regardless of the activities or liabilities that would fell others. The disciple learns to live with his physical liabilities under adverse conditions, and his work maintains its usual high level. Well, that's such an important little section on what physical fatigue can do and should not do and need not do. I suppose as we get older in the body, as DK says, the body begins to creak a bit, maybe more than a bit. But the mind is dominating for those who have achieved perhaps not only mental focus, but that higher state of mental polarization, and then we somehow get through it, no matter what the conditions. We keep ourselves going. We keep ourselves keeping on, keeping on. Perhaps when we were younger, we never thought such a time would come. And what about the emotional condition? And he says, the emotional problem may be the hardest, but only the disciple can handle his own self-pity. Now, remember, that's one of the leading causes of glamour, especially along the 246 line. But only the disciple can handle his own self-pity and free himself from the inner emotional storm in which he finds himself living. That could have been a big hint to the advanced disciple ISGL, who thought of himself as taking the fourth degree, or maybe even having taken it, only to be reminded that his constant inner emotional storm gave the lie to that presumption. Okay, so going on with DK, he says, he must recognize that his integration is weak, for he is working in two phases or sections. Just pause for a minute before we get into this. To what extent is there an emotional storm ongoingly present in ourselves? So, okay, his integration is weak. He's split. He's working in two phases or sections, DK says. Physical, emotional, kind of reminds you of the Cancerian mass consciousness condition of Moon physical and Neptune emotional, and mental soul. Now, is this the case for us and for those we know? And I would have to say it's often the case with people until they really have achieved this, the necessary integration. He is, as the Tibetan, sometimes one and sometimes the other, and usually very thoroughly in either case. Well, in esoteric psychology too, he does deal with the problems of cleavage and the pain of cleavage, and maybe how to solve the cleavages which appear. They waste energy, they prevent a true integration, they prevent synthesis, wholeness. Surely, when studying Master DK, the mental soul combination is emphasized, but it doesn't save us from having to deal with the physical, emotional side. So we oscillate. And he says this duality must be brought into a closer relation. And this is the point to which he must attend as he seeks to establish and preserve the needed synthesis and personality soul integration. Well, we have to bring things together. This law of cohesion, this law of fusion, we must work under this to heal all of these cleavages which cause so much fatigue on many levels, because the energy leaks away through the cleavage. We have to become the integrated disciple. And integration occurs at various levels. You can integrate the personality on its own, or integrate the personality with the soul in various stages. Then another one of these golden suggestions. I mean, is it right to use the word gold? I guess we know what I mean by that. When will disciples learn, Master DK says, that the attitude which involves a certain don't care reaction and a form of indifference is one of the quickest ways by which to release the self, capital S, from personality claims. Well, let's pause on that. What counts? What is essential? What is it that we don't care about? Sort of reminds you of one of the techniques in Glamour World Problem, the technique which leads to the dispersion of Maya, the technique of indifference. Of course, we're not indifferent to everything. We are very much focused on the higher possibility. It's just that we overlook or do not become captured by the normal non-essentials. Repeating them because it's so important. When will the disciple learn that the attitude which involves a certain don't care reaction. See if I can get that clearer. Is, and a form of indifference. Like it doesn't matter. I had a friend who was going through this stage and almost everything he says, doesn't matter, doesn't matter, doesn't matter. Okay, well, maybe it helped him. Some of the things he said that didn't matter seemed to those who said them as if they mattered very much, but he was just following out this technique of indifference, this don't care about non-essentials attitude. When will disciples learn that the attitude which involves a certain don't care reaction and a form of indifference is one of the quickest ways by which to release the self from personality claims? And DK goes on to clarify so we don't make a mistake, because disciples are always likely, under illusion, to misinterpret the Master's words. It's about inevitable. So DK says this is not the don't care spirit which will affect the disciples' attitude to other people. Like, I don't care about you. That's not it. He goes on to say it is the attitude of the integrated thinking personality of the disciple towards the astral or emotional body. It leads him to assume the position, and this is one of those golden sentences, that not one single thing which produces any reaction of pain or distress in the emotional body matters in the very least. Well, wow. How many of us really can sustain that attitude? Having been not so long ago, and maybe to a degree even now, emotionally focused or polarized. So I'm going to repeat that. It leads him to assume the position that not one single thing which produces any reaction of pain or distress in the emotional body matters in the very least. Going on with DK, these reactions are simply recognized, lived through, tolerated, and not permitted to produce any limitation. May I say, if we get caught up in them and then start really focusing upon them, we are captured. It's like that old tar baby story, you punch the tar baby, your hand is stuck, then you punch it again, hoping to get the first hand out, then the second hand is stuck. Things are sticky. I remember an old teacher of mine, I had him out to my house and I offered him something to eat, including honey. Well, he had his own attitude towards it, and he said, no, sticky, sticky. So he wanted to be clean and flowing and not to get, to have any of the energy flows blocked. He knew what he was doing, and he lived to be 82, and he certainly educated me and others. He had a peculiar habit of complaining about those who would rebel against his teaching because, quote unquote, they weren't ready. Well, actually, he was right about that. Very few were ready. I guess I was ready. And one very well-known astrologer who came up with the Blue Star program in astrology became quite a student. He was ready. Ready for what? Ready to listen without having that astral body rebel to the point of rendering the individual non-effective. So, repeating here, these reactions are simply recognized, lived through, tolerated, and not permitted to produce any limitation. So the permitting or not permitting agency is that mind-soul combination. And he goes on to say, all disciples would do well to ponder what I've just said. This is one of those sections you just don't want to pass over. With the yeah, I've heard it. It's so dangerous to say, yeah, I've heard it before. Because it's a mode of deflecting assimilation. And we don't want to fall into that trap when pearls of wisdom are offered to us. The whole process, he says, is based on a deep-seated belief in the persistence of the immortal being, capital B, within the forms of soul and personality. It seems to have a monadic basis, because that is the being within the forms of soul or personality. So he's asking, ponder on this, ponder on this. All disciples, all of us, every one of us would do well to ponder what I've just said. For me, it's so impressive, and I've failed so many times in this, that not one single thing which produces any reaction of pain or distress in the emotional body matters in the very least. So could we not kiss depression goodbye? Maybe we could kiss hilarity goodbye too. Hilarity and its opposite pole, depression. Or anxiety, or that great, maybe greatest of all, glamorous fear. All these things could be met in the don't care spirit. Why? Because I'm caring, you're caring about what is really essential. What is really essential. You can see why it takes lifetimes to reach the point where we can do this. I have associates that are just so stuck in astrality to the point where they just can't even think anymore. Or not think with any kind of objectivity. It's a stage. It will pass. But while it's occurring, it makes real progress impossible. DK goes on to say, this inner realization grows with the development of power in meditation, whether it is individual meditation or group work. Meditation, says the Tibetan, is essential for establishing a freer inner spiritual interplay. Again, whether as a soul, in relation to the personality, or a group of disciples, in relation to their master or to each other. So, meditation, considered as a kind of palliative, the foundation of developing this don't care attitude. But it's such a delicate balance, because the don't care attitude, he's told us, it's not about not caring with people, Just think for a moment of how the Tibetan cares for us, his potential students, his students, those he can reach, and behind him are so many very high souls who deeply, deeply care about the human condition. And yet, they have developed to relative perfection, and maybe to perfection, this don't care attitude regarding the non-essentials. There are always these apparent contradictions on the path of discipleship, on the esoteric path. You say, well, how can that be? This is opposite each other, to care and not to care. Well, examine it more closely, and then we will see how it can be. The Tibetan goes on. You might hear well ask, he says, why is this sensitive interplay between the disciples in a master's group regarded as necessary? And I just want to pause to say that the first two meditations given in Discipleship in the New Age Volume 2 are about the cultivation of this group sensitivity. So why is it necessary? And he goes on to say, is not life complicated enough without too much awareness of the conditions, the personalities, and the soul contacts of those with whom we are associated and with whom we seek to walk as fellow disciples? So may I add, he's putting himself in the place of the one who is questioning him. Don't I have enough on my plate without having to worry about all of these many complications? So that's the question posed, and maybe ahead of us comes the answer. I would like to remind you, he says, that as disciples you are in preparation for initiation, and that impending condition of consciousness implies three things. Okay, so this will be the answer to that question of why must I or trouble myself with all of this? Why must my group trouble itself with all of this? So he begins to tell us, well, we're in preparation for initiation, and initiation is an impending condition of consciousness which is coming up, and it implies three things. Number one, increased awareness and sensitivity to experience and to life in all forms. Well, let us say the initiate is more sensitive, responsive to various forms of life with which he is surrounded than will be the one who is not initiated. maybe one can extend oneself and just imagine, though it's impossible really, but just imagine the sensitivity of the Christ, a becoming seventh degree initiate. I think what happens, we could say the same on a slightly lesser turn of the spiral about the Buddha. One is so inwardly joyful about what reality reveals that one is compelled to share it with the poor ones, that's us, or they are we, who do not yet have that inner joy from inner realization of these subtle experiences that draw ever closer to reality. So anyway, initiation implies three things. Number one, increased awareness and sensitivity to experience and to life in all forms. And may I say, if we can stand it, I'm remembering now that Master K.H. and D.K. debated with regard to Roberto Assagioli whether they should engineer or allow or somehow facilitate the widening of the channel, they called it. But they concluded that he was a very sensitive individual, and to widen it any more could result in a kind of debilitation, because maybe it would just make him too sensitive and he couldn't handle it. I guess it's always the case as we ascend the ladder of evolution, even for the great beings. Maybe such decisions have to be made by the solar logos with regard to the planetary logos, and the cosmic logos local with respect to our solar logos and so forth. How much can you take? That's why initiation is such a strong and exact science. Everything is calibrated. Sanat Kumara, and the Christ, when they stand before the candidate, they know, they've calibrated how much that candidate can take of the energies which would be very suitable for someone still more advanced, but could be, will be debilitating if given in too great a measure in the ceremony of initiation. So anyway, the impending condition of consciousness we call initiation implies also the power to do for others what I have attempted to do for you. At present, on a lesser scale and later, in other lives, as I now do it. So basically, DK is telling us that we one day will be like him, but at the moment we can do what we can do. It's within a much more contained scope and a lesser power of sharing, but we can do something. So we ask ourselves, who are we helping and how? It's not how decay could help such a person, but then, that person would have to be at a certain stage where they could be judged to be an accepted disciple. And then they would have that link with him, and he would write to them as he wrote to those he had gathered around him. Those letters are so wonderful. I have to applaud the work that's being done by Elena and BL and Jeff and Nicholas and maybe Philip's in on it, I don't know. Advanced esoteric astrologers who are learning, hopefully impersonally, and I think so, who these individuals were in their ordinary life, and then comparing that knowledge to what decay sees of them and writes of them from the esoteric perspective. So yes, as initiation comes, that power will increase for us to do for others within a lesser scope and context what DK is doing for us or for those he gathered within a greater scope and context. Also, what else comes? This is all an answer to the question, why do I have to be so interested in all these intricacies involving the other disciples? Why do I have to get so involved in their lives? Is it so necessary to have such a sensitive interplay between them, or to understand that? Why add to the complexity of it all? Well, the world is both very complex and very simple. Really, we have one of those apparent contradictions between the simplicity of things and the complexity of things, and they're both true. So what else is implied? The courage and the strength, he says, to know all, to realize all, and to love with patient wisdom and unchanging sincerity. It sounds like a tall order, doesn't it? Because it's so easy to react to people doing something really stupid as far as we are concerned. We just dwell upon their stupidity, forgetting our own. And therefore, yes, we have to get into the complexities that some question concerning their necessity. If we're to become initiated, which all disciples, true disciples will be, they're preparing for the next initiation. DK goes on to say, this must surely be apparent to you. In the group work in which disciples are now called to participate, you have an opportunity. Always please read Saturn when that word opportunity comes up, even if you don't want to think about Saturn. But it is the God of opportunity. So he says, you have an opportunity offered which can aid in the inducing of all the qualities which are needed by you as candidates for initiation. At no such very distant date as we view time on the inner side. Well, how many lives remember the old saying that the Master's footsteps, they stride centuries. We think in much shorter terms. But we're on our way, and one day we, too, shall have the stride of centuries and plan far ahead. So some of the disciples, DK said, well, look, you are preparing for initiation. There was a man who reminded the Tibetan of himself when he was preparing for the third initiation. There was another man who was offered, what was that, DHB, the first one? Anyway, he was the Lucis Trust astrologer, so to speak. Then there was ISGL with his external ashrams, I think out in Montana and maybe also in North Carolina. He was told he was passing through the second initiation, maybe. And if we could read between the lines, we'd probably be able to see which of those disciples were actually going through the initiation, very, very close. Others would have to wait for it for a few lives to come. But a master like Master DK is very patient. He knows the facts. He knows how long it will take. And maybe I could say, because I'm terribly interested in the subject, that he knows what eternity is. And the strange relativity of time, no matter how long a thing seems to take, it's really over in a flash, instantaneously, because it is of infinitesimal duration, if of any duration at all. So again, the opportunity is very great for these people. He goes on to say, the teaching has always been given that the disciple or initiate must adapt himself to and learn from the conditions in which he finds himself, and from the setting and environment with which his physical plane life has put him in daily touch. This is, says DK, one of the platitudes of the path. Well, I heard this said by someone who loved plants. Bloom where you are planted. And for a little humor added, bloom where you are potted. And Massamoria says, well, we want to run away from our circumstances. Almost when the messenger is at the door, we run off into the woods and refuse the opportunity of meeting the messenger where we are. So an occult platitude, and a platitude becomes a reality when we actually recognize its depth and attempt to perform it. We have to learn from where we are and quit complaining. Why am I here? I deserve this or that. I need a wider scope for service. Before long, you've just fallen into spiritual ambition. So some gratitude for where you are, and some understanding of what can be learned where you are. These are very platitudinous suggestions, but if we could do them, we would actually do the learning. It was, he says, however, at one time as new a concept to the aspirant and the disciple under training as is the teaching, which I seek to give this group of my disciples, and the opportunity I would have you seize. Carpe diem, seize the day. There's always a continuity of revelation. And we have to realize that nothing is static. Those religions who say our Savior, our prophet, our teacher has revealed eternal truth forever are sadly in the grips of the concrete mind and emotional adhesion to the fallacies produced by the concrete mind. So DK says, yes, at one time it was very, very new. This idea that you learn from where you are. The training hitherto carried out upon the inner planes and unrealized oft in the waking consciousness of the accepted disciple has now to be grasped, used, mastered in his waking consciousness and physical brain. So everything is advancing, right? And there is a new mode for training disciples, and we are involved, if we will, with that new mode. Master DK is offering opportunity. But it has to be recognized as opportunity, not just as another book to read, but as a rule of life, as he says, when discussing how the intuition grows under the second ray influence in Esoteric Psychology, Volume 1. Abundant opportunity surrounds us and pervades us. But we are so often deficient in recognizing the nature of the gift. And often the gift of required detachment and necessary discipline, the gift of certain things that are processes that go beyond what the personality what appeals to the personality. The master is not here to appeal to our personality. That would be a great danger. And we would stay in the glamorous and illusory conditions in which we presently find ourselves. A great release is coming for us, but it's a release to help others. And so it has been said by D.K., roughly paraphrased, that the more inwardly free the disciple finds himself, the more outwardly bound he also finds himself. Outwardly bound, committed, pledged, promised. And the old saying, noblesse oblige. So if you have the nobility of advancement, it obligates you to assist those who do not have it yet. Now going on with the Tibetan. The disciple in the past sought to establish harmonious relations with his environment. Harmony being one of the liberating forces. May I say, just as in music, when a chord is harmonious, it flies. It's free. Freed from discord. So repeating, harmony being one of the liberating forces which must precede the release of energy for use after initiation. You begin to wonder, is initiation a great harmonizing event or process? And of course, all of this would be understandable if we consider that humanity itself has had for so long the fourth ray, harmony-inducing soul. That is, after it induces the conflict, leading to harmony. So DK is telling us what it was in the past to achieve this harmony. He, the disciple, practiced patience and forbearance. He tolerated much, right? Which was perhaps against him personally. He practiced patience and forbearance and helpfulness and rendered service, and this was worked out through the process of right external conduct based upon right inner orientation and attitude. Okay, now it's so helpful, to contrast. You always learn much by contrasts. To contrast how it was with how it is. And the outer conduct was, as usual, very important. And certain virtues, patience, forbearance, helpfulness, service, they were required. But, DK goes on, under the new system, made necessary by achieved racial progress, may I add, the hierarchy always adapts to the human condition, seeing what is necessary to improve that particular condition and reach people who are in that condition. So, but under the new system, he says, made necessary by achieved racial progress, this process of right external adjustments, maybe that's what we're supposed to gather from what went before. There's a lot of externality in those adjustments that we've just read about. So DK says, this process of right external adjustments must be paralleled in the New Age by right inner relations, consciously established and consciously held and recognized for what they are by the conscious mind and brain of the disciple. So the inner life is increasing, right? The consciousness is deepening and expanding. And the outer conduct is more surely and steadfastly guided by the inner adjustments. He goes on to say, this therefore involves true knowledge of the disciple's inner group relation, spiritual penetration to the inner life of a brother disciple, may I add, seeing our brother as a soul, part of all that complexity against which some protest as, is it necessary? So spiritual penetration, he says, to the inner life of a brother disciple, and the consequent fusion of the heart, mind, brain of the disciple simultaneously of all that is known on both the outer and inner planes. This has not hitherto been the case. So I wonder if we can sense how important is the guidance we are now receiving. There is a new system, and the inner life is increasing in depth and expansion. Humanity is arriving at this more mental focus, and some at true mental polarization. And we have to know what's going on with us and with others as far as right inner relations go. It sounds so platitudinous, but see another as a soul. But do we? Can we cancel out preoccupation with the personality aspects of another? Doesn't mean we forever ignore them because they have to be dealt with, but can we see others as souls? And so a whole type of inner development is required and is taking place in the new system. And then the outer and the inner and the outer have to be put together. Now, DK tells us this has not hitherto been the case. It is one of the major reasons for the forming of these groups as far as the individual group members are concerned, giving them the opportunity to cultivate the inner, bring it together with the outer, really integrate. DK goes on to say, it will be brought about gradually and safely. May I add, because that is a question, the safety of developmental progress, especially when the master is not in the flesh, so to speak, present to supervise. So repeating here, it will be brought about gradually and safely by the daily use of the group meditations, which I may assign you, and may I add so many of them, or very significant ones, are in Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2. So the daily use of the group meditations, which I may assign you, by a renewed interest in the subject of telepathic work, and by a closer and deeper love cultivated by all of you. Sometimes as I read all this, I think that requirement after requirement is being piled on. But if that is the case, and these are requirements, then we had best know that fact. So these new groups are part of the new system, and the inner and the outer, by adhering to group process, the inner and the outer are fused as they have not been before. So let us say that this is a moment of real progress potential for humanity, a moment of progress. Of course, a moment can be 100 years. It's been 90 years since those first letters were written to the disciples, not necessarily the invitation letters, but the first letters of instruction, 90 years ago, and but really just a flash, a moment of time. What continuity of vision and of attentiveness to group process someone like the Tibetan must have. He has not let go of his groups or the members who have constituted his groups right at the very beginning of Dina 2. He talks about it, doesn't he? He says the disciple CDP is helping children, and is it PDW is working with me and going to his own master, Master Moria, and who else? Is it KES? And not too many letters came to KES, but he was a military man, and he's working with those who have passed over in battle. People are put to work on the other side. There is no escape. Who would want it? By realizing what is required to fulfill spiritual destiny. So he goes on to say, as often he does, and here we have three things of great importance that constitute our spiritual responsibility. It often seems to me like a lot of things of importance are given. So I'm trying to decide whether to go on here. Facility of rapport, that's one. And impersonality, that has been mentioned along with sensitivity, psychic powers, and mental polarization, and a constant infusion of the idea of love has been mentioned. So maybe I'll just read that much about contact, impersonality, and love, which constitute the individual objectives, which I set before each and all of you. And he's going to go on to certain group objectives, and he also lists them as 3. Okay. So the first one, 3 things are of great importance and constitute your individual responsibility. 1, facility of rapport. As a member of my group, and remember he's taking all 10 groups, both formulated and intended for formation, as if they were one group. So as a member of my group, it is essential that you cultivate 2 aspects of the art of rapport, being in touch with, in sync with, in harmony with, which is based eternally on loving attraction. You know, you say, well, we really hit it off, we're on the same wavelength, we could really relate, we developed between us a good rapport, many ways to express this idea of rapport. So, point A, rapport or contact with the soul through a cultivated alignment and correct meditation. Let us say even the master in the heart meditation, a preliminary meditation, at least in the arcane school, would give this kind of rapport, this cultivated alignment with the soul when used in a particular way, or maybe with one's own higher self and higher ideals. Then point B, rapport or contact with your group brothers, and this lays the foundation for constructive, united work. Let me say that without harmony and this natural mutual understanding, which we call rapport, how is united work, constructive work, possible? So, facility of rapport. If things are icy and cold and congealed between group brothers, how does the energy flow? You know, DK was interesting in his language in this respect that he called everybody brother. Maybe it's because the human kingdom is a masculine kingdom, at least at this time. But I think in general, a masculine kingdom, and the Deva kingdom is the feminine kingdom. So everybody was my brother, my brother, my brother. Even though such an approach in our more discriminative times now may not be quite so acceptable, but it does have a basis in the facts. So, the art of rapport, basically a French word. indicating an easy, mutual, attractive interchange filled with understanding between two individuals, or maybe even between two groups or two nations, and so forth. Meditation cultivates it, and it has to be achieved between all group members of a particular group. Then this word has been popping up quite a bit: impersonality, sensitivity, impersonality. And DK, I think, is quite right in saying, is there aught more that I can say on this theme? He's given us some very important statements on impersonality, which certainly help us to understand why it is we're not really achieving it and what it would be to achieve it. Is there aught more I can say on this theme? He says, and then going on, he says, you must learn to view what is said or suggested by any group brother with a complete and carefully developed divine indifference. Note the use of the word divine, for it holds the clue to the needed attitude. Well, let me pause to say there is the divine ray, the second, and of course the primordial ray underlies that. But divine indifference creates the context in which what another group member can say can be received and interpreted. So going on about this indifference, he says regarding divine indifference, it is a different thing to the indifference of not caring, or the indifference of a psychologically developed way of escape from that which is not pleasant. Nor is, he says, nor is it the indifference of superiority. It is the indifference which accepts all that is offered, uses what is serviceable, learns what can be learnt, but is not held back by personality reactions. And then this, very important, it is the normal attitude of the soul or self. This time he doesn't capitalize the word self, but he could. The soul or self to the not self. This divine indifference is the normal attitude of the soul or self to the not self. It is the negation of prejudice, may I say, when we jump to conclusions based upon pre-formulated thoughts which don't really even examine what is being said or suggested. So it is the negation of prejudice, DK says, of all narrow, preconceived ideas, of all personality tradition, influence, or background. It is the process of detachment from, quote, the world, the flesh, and the devil. Let's remember, out there in the desert, following the baptism, the Christ confronted the devil, the personality demands, and negated everyone, not with wordy disquisitions, but with the enunciation of principle, as one might expect from his first-ray mind. So it's this divine indifference is a detachment from the world, the flesh, and the devil, of which the New Testament speaks. So first, there is this question of trying to get myself where I belong, and it's not here. Well, anyway, I seem to have got myself back to the proper point about divine indifference. Okay. So he does tell us what it is and what it isn't. Divine indifference is required to achieve impersonality. It's a high perspective, maybe not only from the soul, but a kind of perspective even seen from the triad. And the don't care attitude is not about people, as I have explained, and certainly as DK has explained. It's about the non-essential, and we are preoccupied so much with the non-essential. We cannot escape from that which is not pleasant. We cannot be so much above it all that we have no care of what is transpiring on a lower turn of the spiral. We cannot act superior to the circumstances which are unfolding below, in short, to the phenomenal world. So repeating what DK says, it is the indifference which accepts all that is offered, uses what is serviceable, learns what can be learnt, but is not held back by personality reactions. May I say, all of this is going to take practice. And then another one of those golden sentences. It is the normal attitude of the soul or self to the not self. Now, let me say that the angel of the presence has this with regard to its personality extension, and we have to slip into that kind of contemplative meditation where we have it also. We certainly do transcend the concrete mind when we enter into that state. It's easy to talk about detachment. But it's not easy to get the right kind of detachment working in our consciousness and behavior. And finally, what I'm going to take up is the third point of these three very important things: love. He's always mentioning it, isn't he? And when you think that his ashram is responsible for expressing the quality of right human relations, they have to be based upon love. And that's hard to achieve because sometimes we're attracted to someone or something and we call it love, but love is more than that. Otherwise, Christ could not say and mean and advise, love thy enemy. So, and here is a definition. Love is that inclusive, non-critical, magnetic comprehension and attitude, which, in group work, preserves the group integrity, fosters the group rhythm, and permits no secondary personality happenings or attitudes to mar the group work. I'm remembering back almost 40 years now when one of the Arcane School members, headquarters members, and I were having something of a altercation, um, emotional maybe, and it was the night of the full moon, and somehow Mary Bailey got a hold of what we were doing, and she said, well, you could be ruining the whole process. To me, that was a memorable moment and a real wake-up call. It was not the right thing. And especially on the night of a full moon when the group integrity had to be fostered and secondary personality happenings had to be set to the side. So this is a great definition, isn't it, of love? Let's kind of remember where it is. Love is that inclusive, non-critical, magnetic comprehension and attitude, which in group work preserves the group integrity, fosters the group rhythm, and permits no secondary personality happenings or attitudes to mar the group work. Every once in a while, you find some really wonderful definitions of love or wisdom or understanding, and those definitions should be collected. Now, compilations have been made on these terms, but within the compilations are those moments of very concise definition, those references which are concise, illuminating definitions. love is that inclusive, non-critical, magnetic comprehension and attitude which, in group work, preserves the group integrity, fosters the group rhythm, and permits no secondary personality happenings or attitudes to mar the group work. Sometimes I feel far from this and feel that many of us are rather further from it than we may normally estimate. So then, as he says, contact, rapport that is, impersonality and love, and notice that in the preparation for the Gemini full moon, we do have that word contact, and we do have that word love, at least for 2 different days. I think we also have the word resurrection. But they are there. They're important words. Contact, impersonality, and love. These 3 constitute the individual objectives which I set before each of you. Now I've got the group, the Glamour program coming up. So this is as far as I can go right now. And we've taken it to page 60 on this day of the 34th anniversary of the founding of the University of the Seven Rays at about 4:30 in the afternoon in Jersey City, New Jersey. Now we're going to get into the group requirements. So the next program. This program has been number 26 and has taken us from page 55 to 60, and I'll be conservative and I'll just put X's where the next program might appear. But it will begin with page 60 and with the important things to be said about the group requirements, which are parallels to contact, impersonality, and love. So friends, Tuya and I and the whole communications team, BL and Joe and Michael and Mikhail and others who help us along the way, we wish you a good experience with these thoughts, many blessings, lots of love, absorption to the degree possible, and application, again, to the degree possible. And this will be posted before long. So we'll see you, well, maybe we'll see some of you on the Glamour work. Or years later, after this has been made. So bye for now.